we need to start treating our people with that autonomy, because if we don't, and if we don't put the governance mechanisms in place for them to do that safely for the organization, we won't get the speed we need to move forward. And what AI does is it gives you for the first time that ability to superpower the individual, to give them context, to give them tools to improve executive judgment, to think through scenarios at scale. And at the same time, as a leader, have that visibility into the organization about what's going on.
Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find out more about Kyndryl at kyndryl.com. Bang! And everything changed. 66 million years ago, an asteroid the size of Manhattan struck the Yucatan Peninsula with the energy of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. Massive clouds of toxic dust blotted out the sun, cooled the planet, and generated torrents of acid rain. Within weeks, 75% of Earth's species were on the road to extinction. One of those was the ammonite, and it was the exact opposite to our friend, the octopus. A little teaser for today's episode today, because why did the octopus survive and thrive and continues to keep on thriving? Our guests today are going to tell us about that. They are the authors of a brand new book, AI and the Octopus Organization. We're joined by both authors, Stephen Wunker and Jonathan Brill. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us.
Good to be here.
Great to have you both on the show. I don't always get to cover books that are just out. And the other reason I covered this was because I was supposed to cover one of these guys' older books, and then they pop out this brand new one as well. So thank you for that, adding new books to my list as well. I set us up there about the ammonite versus the octopus. Maybe one of you will tell us what the hell I was talking about.
300 million years ago, the world was obviously a different place. And that's when the octopus started to evolve into the way it is today. It doesn't have any strong natural defenses. It doesn't have a shell. It doesn't have big teeth. It doesn't have any of the things you would kind of think about as a way to defend itself. And yet, for the last 300 million years, after species after species after species has gone extinct, it hasn't even had to evolve to thrive. In fact, in our age of climate change, it is thriving more than ever. And so the question we started to ask ourselves is, what can we learn from the strategies of nature? What can we learn from the strategies of the octopus to change the way we think about resilience, innovation, performance, agility in our organizations?
One of the things that comes to mind then is when you're reading this intro, you're thinking to yourself, well, digital was probably a big bang. The internet was a big bang. But today we're seeing an exponential big bang with AI. And that's the context into which you entered the book.
Absolutely. We're seeing a nuclear chain reaction of innovation starting to occur. And it's hard to even imagine what this looks like 10 years from now, which means that it's hard to do long-term planning unless you plan in a really different way.
We see analogies in what people are doing today. You would not have high-frequency trading firms without AI. You would not have digital advertising marketplaces without AI. You wouldn't have analyses of patients' telematics as they're outside of the hospital without AI. So they might well need to be kept as an inpatient. This is not futurism. This is right now. So we have to think not just about this very narrow vision of replacement of humans, but what is now possible. There are plenty of examples out there in the real world today where companies have shown what they can do.
I think the difference, right, the big thing to think about is that AI isn't about automating jobs. It is about automating tasks so that we can automate workflows. And it's about that shift, right? How do we replace entire workflows with things that are better so that our people are freed to do the work that creates value as opposed to checking the boxes and conveying information and trying to remember what the heck they did 9 months ago.
I think that point is the biggest thing that we've all experienced, the digital revolution when digital came along and people just basically put websites up and they just digitize their existing processes.
Yeah.
Stephen, I know you worked with the great Clay Christensen. He called it cramming. But AI is being used the same way, where we're not changing the underlying architecture. And this has to happen. You talk about where most organizations sink before they even start, which is organizational debt.
People are very concerned about technology debt, right? We have 23-year-old machines. We're running our ERP on Fortran from the Vietnam War, whatever the issue is, right? But what I think we miss more deeply is the organizational debt that we face, right? That to gain from artificial intelligence, to get the real benefits, what we need to do is profoundly change the way that we enable our people to work. And it's in that culture shift. It's in that process shift. It's in the incentive shift that you will see the difference between failure and success. In 2 years, everybody will have made many of these transitions. That's not going to be the differentiator. It's whether you have made the human transitions, not the technology transitions, that define the difference between being mediocre or maybe worse with all these new technologies and supercharging your potential.
There's this disconnect that was already present between how we formally organized our companies and how we actually behaved. If you look at an org chart, that is a relic of the 1850s when those things were created. And that is not actually how work gets done. It occurs across these different pyramids in the organization. Rarely is that charted out. AI is a great opportunity to chart it, but to rethink it and to look at the bottlenecks and the constraints where things are suboptimal. It might be timing, it might be people's attention, it could be suboptimal decisions. Where can AI alleviate all of those pain points? One of the best capabilities of AI, but one of the least talked about, is the ability to get the right data to the right people at the right time. Now, that can empower the front line. It can revolutionize a middle management job. It can transform senior management meetings. But we have to proactively think about that rather than starting with the technology. Let's start with the problems we have and how we organize. Then so much is possible as we rethink things.
In the book, chapters 2 through 5, you showed the 4 pillars of the Octopus Organization based on the biological traits of the octopus. I love the 8 arms part and how each of the arms actually has a brain, and then there's a central brain, and how it's just beautiful for decision making and how this decision making gets distributed in an age of AI, because the people at the edges are the people closest to the information. And up until now, there's been an asymmetry between power and knowledge inside an organization. Let's share that, because if there's nothing anybody else gets out of today's show, it's that, particularly if you're a leader, because you've worked in Bain, for example. Jonathan, you've worked as a consultant as well, that so much of the knowledge is in the organization, but it's just stuck and it doesn't have a way of getting to the top.
Jonathan pioneered the idea of the Octopus Organization back in 2022 at South by Southwest. He was talking about mainly the RNA and how you have radical adaptability. And then we started looking, as we started conceptualizing the book, at what else makes an octopus weird. And there's actually a lot, which is how you frame it in the different elements of those chapters. So the fact that it has 9 brains makes it a great analogy for distributed intelligence. But it also is a secret to how an octopus can thrive without any real natural defenses in this hyper-competitive, dangerous environment that it's in. You have 8 arms, and they could be doing 8 independent things. They're all sensing and thinking and acting on their own, and yet with complete contextual awareness about what's going on. Now, this is what an organization needs to act like if it is going to be hyper adaptable and hyper responsive to the changes with the meteor strike of AI. So what does it make possible when you have a brain, if you will, in each of the arms of the organization, all the way down to the front line? Now we can suspend all the past assumptions about what can and can't be devolved to the front line. I mean, look, Aidan, we've been talking for 40 years about the need to devolve and de-silo organizations back since Tom Peters in the 1980s. And it hasn't really happened because you haven't had the right information at the front line, nor the right amount of visibility by the central brain, senior leadership, to what's going on in the arms of the organization. Now AI changes all of that. It makes it possible.
It changes the cost of doing right. I spend more of my time looking at the psychology of management and less on the operational transformation tactics. And what strikes me the most about organizations is we've talked about psychological safety. We've talked about becoming more innovative. We've talked about being more agile. And there are two reasons it hasn't happened. One is it's been too energy intensive for managers to put 2 hours a week into their 40 employees and then do their 40-hour-a-week job. AI allows software to do 80% of that work for you. But the second thing that we don't talk about is maybe it wasn't a good idea for you as a leader to convince your secretary that they could be a corporate vice president. And what we're seeing in this world of acceleration, in this world where agents superpower your people, is that it is not only in your interest to accelerate their careers, it is the only thing that will enable you to accelerate yours.
I think that's why out of all those things you talk about, the gates that you have to go through, edge computing, all these kind of things, AI, software maturity, that's where people put their efforts, not on the human parts. And it's the human parts that block the technological parts from actually distributing in the organization.
Absolutely. I mean, I've worked with a major holding company that basically said we aren't going to focus on the the digital transformation side. We're going to focus on the human transformation side. And they are successful across a whole range of industries, running multi-billion-dollar portfolios with Excel, right? The technology helps, but it's that human side, it's the culture side that superpowers the technology, not the other way around.
The other beautiful biological trait that you talk about is the neural necklace. And you say insight radiates from the center, but the discovery is coordinated at the edges and the arms and heads are working as one. Maybe we'll explain what this metaphor means for the organization.
So when you talk about an octopus, there's a really interesting thing about the intelligence in the octopus. If a shark bites off a tentacle from the octopus, that tentacle will go and attack the shark. It has enough intelligence in it to make decisions to go after that shark on its own. When we talk about distributing intelligence, when we talk about pushing decision-making down into the firm, when we talk about creating autonomy in the firm, what we're talking about is that how can the tentacles operate on their own and yet coordinate to do something bigger than themselves?
I love that, the idea of the arm encountering a shark and going, wait a second, I just need to check with the boss if this is okay to escape and not get my arm ripped off. Because that's actually what happens inside organizations, Stephen.
Jonathan and I have an article out this week in Top Sales Magazine, which is the leading publication for that sales profession. And we talk about how AI makes possible close to segments of one, at least going from 3 to 5 segments to 50 plus. And in fact, it already has done this in industries like mobile gaming. You can do that because you start to de-silo things like marketing and sales. And you develop very detailed profiles on the customer, on their context, on the cues. You can get a very clear picture about what is going to be important to them. And then you can create marketing materials that are very bespoke to their needs, which is what mobile gaming companies do because they have all this data and they operate in this real-time environment. Now you can bring this to hyper complicated B2B sales environments even. So you've de-siloed these operations. Now, look, this opens up a lot of questions around who's going to do what and where are the decision rights lying and how do you create the necessary competencies? So it opens up a whole other series of questions. But it creates this remarkable capability if you can start addressing those human obstacles to change to super turbocharge your sales and marketing organizations. That's just one example of that neural necklace, creating this fluidity of information that you just didn't have before AI could bring structured, unstructured data.
I love that you call out, again, the human aspects that block the change. So two gremlins that are liable to gum up the works are groupthink and analysis paralysis. When you do get the organization acting as one brain, not one voice.
You know, people can freak out when you have a lot of information being presented to you. And so either you gravitate to one easy, commonly understood framing of the marketplace, which is wrong in a VUCA world. That is a very dangerous thing to do. Or you freeze because you have so much information. And that is incredibly wrong when you have this hyper speed of transformation in an industry and in the broader economy. So we have to name the dangers to be able to defeat them. And I think there are certainly two. It means that we have to change how we make decisions, who gets brought into conversations. We need to change our comfort level with uncertainty. We need to insist as managers that we're presented with multiple options, and we often take multiple options, probably at different levels of investment. But you have to think about your portfolio of options and not your one big bet, which is a hyper dangerous thing to do today.
Jonathan, you worked as futurist in residence in a company I admire. I know lately people are starting to not admire so much, but for different reasons, for political reasons. But what a company Amazon is, and what a company, if you were lucky enough to have stock in that company in the early days, how you've absolutely killed it. But I love the principles, regardless of what people think or not of the company, of how they operate and how they're inventive, of how when they run into, oh, that doesn't exist, well, let's build it ourselves, like Amazon Web Services. But one of the things I absolutely love is how the company used APIs. And there's a common law called Conway's law, which is where the organizational technology mirrors how the organization actually works. And Amazon were huge pioneers of API mandate and API using APIs. But equally, they mirrored that with small, close-knit teams and these service interfaces. I'd love you to share firsthand your experience of that and how this ties exactly into the Octopus organization.
It was a deep insight for me. I worked on data centers in the 90s and 2000s quite a bit. And what was interesting was how Amazon kind of got this idea of virtualization together, and that you don't have one application on one server, that you start to spread these things across devices. And there was an insight in there, I think, that defined how Amazon operated, which was that you could have these independent clusters, right? These neural clusters in the organization that could operate very differently, operate on whatever software stack, operate with whatever way of working that the leader thought was appropriate, as long as everybody else's code, as long as everybody else's processes could jack into that team. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in here about how the octopus works, right? That the octopus has these neural nodes that operate independently. And just to clarify what I was saying before, it's not that the octopus asks if it can get its arm bit off. If the octopus gets its arm bit off, the tentacle on its own, no longer attached to the octopus, will attack that shark. And so what I'm suggesting is the level of autonomy, the level of independence that you give your people gives them an ability to innovate. When you look at special forces operators in the military versus infantry, right? Especially in the UK military, the British military. What you'll find is that the enlisted men and the general, they don't have a sense of seniority in the way that you might a CEO and an intern. They operate at the same place, they eat at the same mess. And the reason behind that, and I had a special forces planner who used to run my strategy capability. And, he'd never quite say what he did, but what he would do was say where he was. Now, imagine if you're operating 250 people, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the border of North Korea. Just imagine what you're doing every night. Now, imagine for a second what happens if you get caught or anything goes wrong. Whatever the general said you should do is irrelevant to the international disaster that's about to occur. My point is, we need to start treating our people with that autonomy, because if we don't, and if we don't put the governance mechanisms in place for them to do that safely for the organization, we won't get the speed we need to move forward. And what AI does is it gives you for the first time that ability to superpower the individual, to give them context, to give them tools to improve executive judgment, to think through scenarios at scale. And at the same time, as a leader, have that visibility into the organization about what's going on. In the Navy, it's the shift from what we call kill chains, where, the president says something, therefore the admiral says something, blah, 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 down to the swabby, right? To the swabby sees something, takes an action, it impacts strategy, right? In the world that we're moving into, we're moving from what the Navy calls kill chains into what the Navy calls kill webs, where the person closest to the action, who has the information and the capability to make a decision, or in the case of the Navy, increasingly, I believe, the software, they need to have the decision right to take the action. How are you going to do that in your organization? That's the big question of the next 5 years.
There's a great counterexample that comes from the Navy too. Around 1900, Navy captains had a tremendous amount of authority to go out there and basically enact the admiral's orders. Go out on the high seas and execute commander's intent. And by 1930, that autonomy had almost entirely vanished. And it was due to one form of technological progress, which was the radio. Because the admirals could give orders, they did. And that's human nature, right? We all think that we know best and we're going to give the orders. You could use AI for that, to get tremendous visibility into what's happening at the front line and then be barking orders all day long. And that is not the spirit of the Octopus Organization. That is going to lead you to be an ammonite, to be this very slow-moving, fossilized relic fighting yesterday's battles and not being responsive to what's happening today. So let's just be aware of our human natures and realize we have to act in a contrary way.
There's a meditation I do, and it's called heart-brain coherence. The whole idea is that you sync your heart and brain. And I thought of it when I was reading the book, because first you talk about the importance of the 9 brains, each limb having its own brain and the central brain. But then you talk about the beautiful concept that I didn't know about the octopus, that it has 3 hearts. And I thought about how the brain and heart working together creates this ultimate adaptable organism that, if that's adapted by the organization, it can at least thrive for a while in these rogue waves, in these treacherous waters that are in the business world today. Let's share this beautiful concept of the 3 hearts and what each of them do and how it reflects the organization.
So an octopus has different hearts for different purposes. It has a heart to pump its blood. It has hearts to power its gills. And it can direct energy to the different hearts depending upon the needs. It can even give itself a heart attack, which is just astonishing, so that it can just have maximal energy to do what is necessary in the moment. Organizations' hearts are their processes. Sometimes they're articulated, sometimes they're invisible, and therefore we call culture. But they operate, or should operate, at different speeds and for different purposes. So we define 3 of them. There's the analytic heart. Most organizations, particularly the larger ones, are pretty good at being the analytic heart. There's the agile heart of being entrepreneurial and flexible. And usually, the bigger the organization, the worse they are at that. And then critically, particularly for AI, there's the aligned heart to make sure that people have a common purpose. They have a clear vision about where things are going. They feel that the organization is not out there to cross them, but they're sort of both functionally and emotionally aligned on what needs to get done. And with all the dislocation that AI plus everything else is creating in organizations, you need to have that aligned heart. So think about what are the different hearts you need for different purposes, and then really take stock about how good you are at each and whether people know the rules of engagement for the different purposes. In a particular meeting, is this more about analysis? Is it about agility? Is it about alignment? Sometimes it's all three, but you need to have a sense about what the weighting is in order to hit the right notes to make sure that people interact in the right way, but also that they listen to the messages the right way too.
One of the examples, because you called it out there, the difficulty for a large organization to have an agile heart. But an example you give in the book is L'Oreal, which is a massive organization. Maybe we'll share how they engage the agile heart.
I could not believe this when I interviewed a friend of mine who works as an executive at L'Oreal. So this is the world's largest cosmetics company. It's enormous, tens of billions of dollars. They can go from concept in a conference room to product on shelf in 6 weeks, which is just breathtaking. The reason they can do that is because they have to. In the cosmetics world, trends go very, very quickly. And so you have to be responsive at that rate in order to thrive. And so then they've developed all the muscles around that in order to be able to do so. The world is picking up for all of us in terms of its rate of change. Maybe we don't need to go from concept to product in 6 weeks, but it's definitely going to be a faster time frame than it has been historically. So we need to think a little bit like L'Oreal. How do we optimize our systems to operate at that rate rather than hope the world optimizes to our internal clock speed?
I thought this is important. I'd love you to give some examples of companies either you've worked with or you've seen that start small. Like the example you give is Walmart's Scintilla platform, this AI platform that can just really sense what's happening in the marketplace. But maybe some other examples of what you're seeing out there would be great, just so people can see you don't have to be massive. You don't have to have huge pockets to get started. You can get started in a smaller way.
The realities here are these, right? Companies like Lovable, which does vibe coding. You can explain in English what you want a website to do, what you want a piece of software to do, and then AI will write that code for you to give a sense of speed, of scale, right? You can explain, I want this website to do so on and so forth, maybe in 15 minutes. And it will write the code. It will give you a web page and so on and so forth. It'll take another couple of hours to jack in all of the APIs, get everything tested, so on and so forth. But when you think about what had to happen before, right, you had to explain what you wanted. Some client manager would listen to what you said, write it down wrong, give it to an artist, a designer who would make the wrong thing, give it to a coder who would then make the wrong thing, and then you would get to pay to do it over again. And 6 or 8 weeks later, or 6 months later, you might have a product that kind of did what you needed, and the market would have changed. Now for, call it $100 a month, as a product manager, you can do that yourself. Now, will it get there 100%? No. Will it give everybody on the team everything they need to do it right the first time in 3 days? Yes. What we're talking about is that shift in mindset, that shift in workflow. Like we said before, I don't think that makes all the jobs go away. I think everybody's going to do this approximately at the same time, and therefore everybody needs to do 10 times as much work with the same number of hours. So the question that we need to ask is, how are we going to do higher quality work faster? How are we going to innovate harder? How are we going to push that capability, those rights to make decisions down into the firm? Because unless we allow our tentacles to explore and take action faster than we can tell them what to do, like the navies of the early Second World War, we will be sunk.
Let me give you an example from my work, New Markets Advisors consulting firm I run. We're about 15 people. So we have not changed our headcount. We do a lot more now, and we do it a lot faster. We have a consumer healthcare client. Previously, we might have created concepts with them based on some in-depth market research. Now we can sketch out what these concepts will physically look like if they're devices, for instance. We can get an engineering schematic for different ways that this might work, whether it's mechanical or electronic. We can get a rough bill of materials on the costing. We can get a rough regulatory analysis around where it might be easier to bring to market, at least in a test market sense. Now, is that going to replace an industrial designer or a lawyer in the end? No. But it's going to allow us to winnow down concepts a lot faster than we could before. So there's going to be a lot fewer dead ends that we run into. And when we finally do the turnover, then they're going to be able to devote their energy and their very high cost labor to the things that are the most promising. And we can do this all so much faster than we did before. So, you typically think of cheaper, faster, and better. And so much of the world is focused on cheaper. Yeah, I mean, in some instances, sure, cheaper. But there's a whole lot of faster and better that people are just starting to broach the possibilities of.
To me, I think that the interesting thing about so much of AI and workflows is you're suddenly getting all three: faster, better, and cheaper. And that's what people are kind of missing, is that it's no longer an A plus B equals C equation. You can put all three on the same side.
Let's share, Jonathan, as well, what you're working on, because you're working on a product that actually can do what Steve is doing, but for the individual. So if you have an idea, you can really move fast to market and actually see, do you have a patent on your hands?
I'm the head of invention at a company called Deep Invent. And one of the things we're doing is reinventing the patent workflow. And it's stunning when you think about how patents are created and why they're created today. So we create patents to create a monopoly around area of invention. When we do it today, right, we do it typically after we have an idea that we think has market value. So you're 6 or 9 months often into an invention process before you file a patent. And the reason is that it often costs about $500,000. You've got to get an applied inventor or engineer, maybe some scientists involved. You have a product manager who's figuring out what the product opportunity is. You have patent lawyers. And, so you're 6 or 9 months into this thing and you haven't protected your area of invention. What would happen if your mom could have an idea on Tuesday, say, I have a problem in my quilting circle. And then AI could say, okay, well, that's interesting. Here are all of the companies that kind of deal with stuff around this space. Here is everything that's ever been written about this. Here's all of the scientific literature that's ever been developed. Here are some areas of invention that might be interesting to you. Which of these are interesting? And then let's come up with 10 inventions. It'll come up with 10 ideas for how you might solve this problem. And you spend maybe 20, 30, 45 minutes with it. Say, hey, yeah, all right, I got it. This is really, I think, the right thing. And you press a button and it files the patent for you. Now, what's interesting about what we've done at Deep Invent is our last rev of the software, we actually had the AI tools write the software, figure out what was useful, file the patent themselves, in this case through our attorney, because you had to do that because the government's not caught up to this idea yet, and file its own patents on inventions it had created for products we are selling. That is the shift that we're talking about. We're creating tools that are faster, that are better, and that are cheaper, all at the same time.
It's an incredible opportunity. I want to share one thing. I can't let you guys go without sharing, because I want to show you have the scar tissue of what it's like to have an organization block your ideas. That's why I wanted to tee you up with the idea of Deep Invent, because back in 2009, you both have the experiences of this, and it's probably why you do the work you do today, to try and prevent people experiencing the frustration you had. So another great company you worked in was HP, Jonathan. And then I'm going to come to you, Stephen, and talk about Psion. But back in 2009, you saw an opportunity, just like our friend Chuck House, by the way, a predecessor of yours in HP, saw with the screen for the computer, and he was blocked, and he wrote a book called Permission Denied. But you saw this when you were like, how the hell are we not pursuing a marketplace for touchscreen devices? And you were told to be a fast follower, and it was terrible advice. But I wanted to share this because it's what the AI Octopus organization can solve. It can solve bottom-up information getting blocked, get to the top of the people making decisions from the people who see it on the field. Maybe you'll share your story, and then it'll come and share Stephen's.
Well, I think there are two challenges here, right? The thing that I learned at HP is the way tops-down organizations work. Most organizations today are tops-down. Is shareholders have a set of shareholder objectives. They hire a board. The board enforces the shareholder objectives. They hire the executive teams. They incentivize all the way down. If you are not aligned with the shareholder objectives, you are not going to have a thing happen. And what happened at HP was it was really oriented toward reliable performance, especially after Mark Hurd, the CEO, came in. There was a moment where there was an opportunity to get a couple of years ahead, potentially on the capacitive touchscreen technology. I was a consultant at that point that came in. They said, hey, here's the opportunity. Here's what it looks like. Here's what other competitors are doing. Here's where I think the market is. And I got brought in. The president of the PC group came in. CTO came in. We had a big chat about it. And they said, well, here's the thing, is that our strategy is we are going to fast follow Apple. We're just going to let them build the market and then take it. That didn't work. What happened was they got caught with their pants down. They tried to buy something called WebOS, which was Palm Computing, if you remember that, their operating system, which was not set up for the next generation of devices. So they went there, they fast followed, they tried to buy the assets they needed. They didn't work. And then they got their pants taken off of them. They got their shirt eaten, or whatever mixed metaphors we can come up with here. And it was entirely knowable that was going to happen. The issue was that the people at the bottom knew this. The people in the middle weren't listening to them or asking them to actually vet the technology. And the leadership was disincentivized to think about the world beyond their revenue windows, their personal revenue windows. And so you ended up with an almost inevitability here of the investor objectives, which are growth, but conservative, reliable growth, were in conflict with the reality that there was a sea change in the market that the people on the ground could see, but that investors could not yet.
It's always the case, and it gets stuck in the middle. A decade previous, Stephen, you had a similar experience with another product that Apple went on and not so successfully developed, which was a PDA, but this was in 99 at Psion. Maybe you'll share your scar tissue as well.
So I left Bain & Company in 99 because I wanted to do something exciting. I was working on a private equity project in plastics, and I thought the whole world was passing me by. So I joined up with another ex-Bainey. He was the CEO of Psion, which is the British company that had actually invented the PDA back in the 80s. And they were competing against Palm Pilot, the different sort of machine, different form factor, and doing pretty well. The CEO had this idea of going into what he called a smartphone. This was a very novel term at the time. So basically connecting a PDA into being a phone. And that was about all that we had as a concept. And we were going to do this on a white label basis for Motorola and parts of it for Ericsson as well. So we were the guts behind their initial entries into the smartphone business. Now, I quickly got intoxicated by what a smartphone could do. You could play games and you could do maps and you can even have short videos. It was really beguiling. And so we started developing a pretty high spec device that could do all these things based on components from elsewhere, but integrating them together for the very first time. All the while, there was this lone industrial designer on the team who said, hey, how about we just have a basic phone, but with a keyboard rather than just a numeric keypad? And I said, oh, you simpleton, you. No, we can do far more glamorous things here. And so he broadly was ignored because we were entranced by this high-end device and the demands of our big, demanding customers. And we wanted the prestige. So it was the culture, it was the classic innovator's dilemma track of being trapped by what our big, demanding customers wanted. And sure enough, we developed all sorts of dependencies on components. There was a critical software supplier that let us down in terms of the data connectivity with early mobile networks. And that was a big, big problem. And it turned out that the industrial designer was describing what became the Blackberry. Because those guys were working on the same problem at the same time, and they came out with the Blackberry, and they cleaned up and they dominated the smartphone business for 7 years until the iPhone came out. So I took away some lessons from that. For one, listen. Secondly, for heaven's sake, read Clay Christensen. I didn't read his stuff until the weekend before I interviewed, with the great man. And then I smacked my forehead and I thought, oh, I was such an idiot for not reading this stuff beforehand, because that's exactly the trap that I fell into. And then, yes, have a vision about where the market is going to go. And this definitely applies for AI, right? Have that futuristic vision, but have your priorities and your step-by-step route to get there. Way too many companies are at either end of the spectrum. They've got this gee whiz Jetsons version of the future, and then they have their very boring here and now, let's put a chatbot in for something and try to replace a human. And they're not thinking about all the steps in between. Had we done that, we should have been Blackberry. We had every right to be Blackberry. But largely because I was 30 years old, I didn't know the trap I had fallen into, and I learned from that experience.
I think that's why we do the work we do, because that knowledge that you can learn from just reading an article or a book can change the lens through which you see, and you see something totally different. You see opportunity where others see threat or see nothing at all. It's why I love sharing brilliant work like this. We haven't even got near the amount that's in the book. There's a chapter on how do you create strategic serendipity. There's a chapter at the end, chapter 8, where the guys bring you as an organization, as a leader, through a load of questions to ask yourself and exercises to implant into your organization. Doesn't cost you money, cost you a bit of time, cost you a bit of reorganization of the organization as well to become an Octopus organization. Guys, let's share each of you where people can find you. I know you do keynotes. I know you do consulting. I know, Stephen, you do a lot of jobs to be done work. And of course, the patent work that you do now, Deep Invent, Jonathan as well, really valuable stuff. Let's share maybe Jonathan first.
My name is Jonathan Brill. I'm a business futurist. You can find me at jonathanbrill.com. I do keynotes and workshops around the world. I'm in about 80 cities a year, so I might be near you today.
And Stephen?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Please write. I do respond to all my emails, so I would love to just correspond and hear what you're thinking about all this. The company is New Markets Advisors, and you can find us in many places online.
Authors of AI and the Octopus Organization, Jonathan Brill and Stephen Wunker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Kyndryl, and the Kyndryl Institute, with a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability. Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find out more about Kyndryl and the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com.